In 1956, MGM cut an 11-minute scene from Forbidden Planet that was never meant to reach theaters. The scene involved in Frances and her pet tiger. Something about innocence, power, and an ancient myth that made censors panic. For decades, only a handful of people knew it existed. The scene explained why the tiger suddenly attacks Altaira after her first kiss. But the explanation was too controversial for 1950s audiences. What MGM buried reveals a dark secret about the film's true meaning. In 1952, two matte painters who had never written a screenplay in their life walked into MGM with a story they called Fatal Planet. Irving Bloch and Alan Adler were not taken seriously. Science fiction back then was considered a dumping ground for low-budget throwaways, a place where studios sent their leftover actors and reused monster suits. But their pitch had something different. It came from two men who didn't think in words, but in images. They saw a planet not just as a place, but as a canvas for fear, awe, silence, and technology. MGM tossed it out at first, but something about it lingered. By 1950, the tide had shifted. Studio heads were no longer ignoring the television boom or the growing curiosity about space. MGM took the gamble and gave it a second look. That dusty pitch got pulled out of a drawer and quietly transformed into what would become Forbidden Planet, one of the most expensive sci-fi experiments of its time. MGM didn't just approve it, they bet on it. Somewhere between $1.90 and $2 million got poured into a genre that usually scraped by with $150,000 to maybe $500,000. The studio wasn't just trying to make a sci-fi flick, they wanted to elevate it. Set designs were built from scratch. The cast wasn't made up of fading B-list stars, but of pancomers like Leslie Nielsen and in Frances, paired with the gravitas of Walter Pidgeon. Every dollar went into turning a genre nobody respected into something people couldn't stop looking at. MGM's decision was bold enough that the industry stood still for a second. Was it a foolish risk or a new future? Even inside MGM, executives whispered about the cost. But the gamble worked. It didn't just make its money back. It changed what science fiction meant to studios, showing them that the stars didn't have to be cheap to shine. Originally, the story was set in the year 1972. But the technology in the script felt too wild, too far-fetched, for anything remotely near the real timeline. So they flung the story 200 years forward, landing in the 23rd century on a distant world called Altair 4. The core plot quietly borrowed from Shakespeare's The Tempest. Dr. Morbius became a futuristic prosp. His daughter Altaira took the place of Miranda. Even the monsters weren't just monsters. They were shaped by the human mind, pulled from the subconscious like Shakespeare's spirits of vengeance. This quiet fusion of high art and pulp genre made the film stand out. It wasn't just lasers and spaceships. It was about power, ego, control, and fear buried so deep inside the brain that even the stars couldn't escape it. MGM handed the directing job to Fred M. Wilcox, who had no history with sci-fi. His biggest credit was Lassie Come Home. People raised eyebrows, but MGM wasn't looking for a visionary to reinvent the genre. They wanted a disciplined hand who could handle a big cast, big set, and tight schedule. Wilcox delivered. His outsider perspective made everything stranger in the best way. He didn't shoot it like a sci-fi film. He shot it like it was Shakespeare in space. There were no jokes, no nods to the audience, no winks at the camera. He treated it seriously. That gravity helped ground the surreal plot. He let the special effects breathe, but never lost focus on the human faces at the center of the story. The script went through a transformation under screenwriter Cyril Hume. He took Bloch and Adler's visual concept and sculpted it into something deeper. Freudian psychology started creeping in. The monsters became more than physical threats. They became symbols of repression and desire drawn from the mind of Dr. Morbius himself. Hume didn't just write dialogue. He added layers: literary, psychological, mythological. The story had echoes of past trauma and fear of power and the way knowledge itself could destroy you. It wasn't just about aliens. It was about the dark corners of the human soul tucked behind a shining curtain of advanced machines. Walter Pidgeon was 58 years old when MGM asked him to play Dr. Morbius. He had spent decades playing dignified roles in prestige dramas. Sci-fi was not in his vocabulary. He nearly said no. What changed his mind wasn't the genre. It was the promise of a $1.9 million production and a script that mirrored The Tempest. Pidgeon saw the story at weight. It wasn't camp. It was cautionary. He took the part. And in doing so, he gave the film the seriousness it needed. He anchored the madness with restraint. And Frances, only 23, walked onto the set wearing what would later be called the first miniskirt in film. Her costumes, designed by Helen Rose, were shocking. They predated Mary Quant's fashion breakthrough by almost a decade. Executives were nervous. Spain banned the film until 1967. Conservative theaters backed out, but the look stuck. Barefoot, innocent, futuristic, Altaira became an icon, not just for her beauty, but for the way she defied expectations. Frances didn't just wear the future, she became part of it. Leslie Nielsen played Commander Adams, the serious moral leader of the crew. Before he was ever known for comedy, he was the straight man. His presence in Forbidden Planet was commanding. He looked like he belonged on the bridge of a spaceship. His role foreshadowed what would later become Captain Kirk. Nielsen later joked that the real star was Robbie the Robot. And, in a way, he was right. Warren Stevens played Doc Oro, the one who figured it out too late. His final words, monsters. Monsters from The ID landed like a hammer in 1956. Most audiences didn't even know what the ID was, but they felt it. His character's death was off-screen, quiet, horrifying. He tried to use the Krell's ancient machine, and it broke him. Stevens delivered it all with a calm that made it worse. The monster wasn't out there. It was inside. Robbie the Robot didn't speak for himself. Marvin Miller gave him his voice, but got no credit. Inside the suit was stuntman Frankie Darro. Darro lasted only so long. After a few drinks at lunch, he nearly fell over mid-scene and was let go. But the voice and the movement came together anyway. And Robbie became immortal. He wasn't just a machine. He had charm. He was a new kind of character. Friendly, deadly, mysterious. The film's first premiere wasn't even in Hollywood. It was March 3rd and 4, 1956, at the Southeastern Science Fiction Convention in Charlotte. Hollywood came later on March 23rd at Grauman's Chinese Theater. That kind of rollout was rare for a genre film. Most sci-fi stories premiered quietly, slipped into late-night showings, but Forbidden Planet opened big with cinemascope and stereophonic sound. It played for 6 months at Grauman's. MGM treated it like an epic. When the music credits rolled, they didn't say score by. Instead, they called it Electronic Tonalities by Lewis and Baby Baron. The union rules wouldn't allow them to be credited as composers. The Barons didn't use instruments. They built circuits. They made music by breaking things. Loops, feedback, static. Their work wasn't music by 1956 standards, but it changed the rules anyway. Reviews were mixed. Some critics didn't know what to make of it. The New Yorker thought it was a joke. British critics were kinder, but still puzzled. The Shakespeare, the psychology, the monsters, they didn't fit together easily. Some saw brilliance, others just saw robots in color. But the confusion didn't stop the film from growing in stature. It didn't need instant approval. It was built for the long game. The film pulled in $1.53 million in the US and Canada, and $1.22 to $35 million overseas. That gave it just under $3 million in total, with a modest profit of $210,000. Not a bomb, but not the smash MGM had hoped for. It ranked as the 30th highest grossing American film of 1956. Respectable. But the numbers weren't the real story. What mattered came later. In 1957, it got a nomination for Best Special Effects at the 29th Academy Awards. It didn't win. The 10 Commandments took the prize. But Forbidden Planet didn't need the trophy. Its monster was drawn with light. Its skies were painted. Its effects were practical, handmade, strange. The award nomination was proof that something had shifted. In Forbidden Planet, There was once a scene that tried to explain something audiences never quite understood. It was quiet, symbolic, and unsettling. Around the 11th minute, Dr. Ostro pointed out something about Altaira and her tiger. He said only a virgin could tame a unicorn, and he saw something similar in the way Altaira could stroke and command a full-grown tiger without fear. That scene didn't make it into the final cut. MGM cut it clean. The Motion Picture Production Code at the time found the virgin unicorn metaphor too suggestive. The idea that a woman's sexual innocence gave her mystical power over animals. That wasn't something they could let reach theaters in 1956. When Altaira kisses Commander Adams for the first time, her tiger turns on her. It doesn't hesitate. The animal that once laid peacefully beside her now sees her as a threat. In the finished version of the film, there's no explanation. It looks like a random moment of violence, but it wasn't random. The deleted scene would have made it clear that kiss, that one moment of romantic awakening, was the end of her power over the animal. Like in those old myths, where the unicorn bolts the second innocence is gone. When the tiger lunges, it isn't just about danger. It's about change, loss, and something that can't be undone. For years, the only place that scene existed was in a book. The novelization of Forbidden Planet, written by Philip MacDonald under the name W.J. Stewart, came out in 1956 before the movie ever hit theaters. It kept the unicorn line. It spelled it out word for word. How Altaira's purity kept the tiger in check. Most people reading the book assumed it was just a creative flourish. They didn't know the scene had been filmed and then buried. For almost 20 years, nobody outside of MGM saw any evidence that it had ever been shot. MGM had a rule: destroy all work prints. They didn't want alternate versions of their movies floating around. They didn't want raw cuts leaking to the public. But somehow, Forbidden Planet slipped through. In 1977, the old work print turned up in a forgotten archive. It had the unicorn scene. It had different takes, alternate dialogue, raw sound. Nobody knows exactly why it was saved. Maybe someone forgot. Maybe someone couldn't bring themselves to burn it. But it survived. And when it resurfaced, it changed everything. That work print got restored. First, it showed up on a Criterion Laserdisc. Then on the 50th anniversary DVD. Then again on Blu-ray. Fans who had grown up watching the theatrical version finally saw what had been missing. The kiss, the tiger, the myth. It all clicked. Altaira wasn't just a space ingenue. She was a metaphor walking. Her story folded into layers of innocence, sexuality, and the invisible lines Hollywood wasn't ready to cross. And there was something else that sparked controversy in 1956. Altair had a scene where she swam alone, floating through the water like something from a dream. It looked like she was nude. Word spread fast. And Frances on screen naked in a sci-fi movie. But she wasn't. She wore a skin-colored bodysuit. It was thin, seamless, carefully designed to look like bare skin under light and rippling water. The illusion worked too well. Audience members were outraged. Morality groups wrote angry letters. Some theaters pulled the film from their lineups. MGM had to issue public statements. They said, no, and Frances was never nude. No, nothing indecent had happened. But people didn't buy it. They couldn't believe it was just lighting and angles. George Foley, the cinematographer, had used precise lighting, kept shadows out of frame, avoided seams, and let water reflection hide the costume's edges. He turned a bodysuit into a scandal. Even the crew was shocked at how real it looked. MGM wanted to push boundaries without crossing the line. They found a way to do both. In 1972, when MGM tried to re-release the film as a kiddie matinee, they cut over 6 minutes. The swimming scene was gone. So were several flirtatious exchanges. Anything too suggestive. The version that showed in theaters that year had AG rating, but it was missing what gave the movie its edge. For years, kids saw the tame version. It wasn't until much later that audiences got to see the original uncensored take again. Spain didn't allow the film at all. For over 10 years, Forbidden Planet was banned there. The Spanish censors under Francisco took issue with Frances's miniskirts and that swimming scene. It wasn't the words, or the monsters, or the spaceship. It was the costumes. Her skirts were too short, her body too visible. The film didn't screen in Spain until 1967.